Well, here are our guests for tonight's show. Academic and political analyst Bruno Becklini joining us from Porto Alegre, Brazil. And we also have radio host and journalist at CPR News, Don DeBar, joining us from New York. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Let's start off with Mr. Becklini in Porto Alegre. Washington seems to be taking tensions with Venezuela to new levels. How would you describe the situation right now, especially with this heavy U.S. military buildup in the Caribbean?
Well, thanks for having me. I would describe this as siege and bullying from Trump administration, and especially from Marco Rubio Gusano, the administration being the head of State Secretary. I would say that Venezuela is taking their risks or not being invaded in a classic big stick policy with Marines going through Venezuela beaches, but by being provoked to go on a false flag operation and tending to justify a direct attack against the Miraflores policy, or if you may be better, direct against President Nicolás Maduro. I'm glad to see the good behavior and solidarity posture of Mr. Gustavo Petro, President of Colombia, who understands that this is the time for being together, to get inside, shoulder by shoulder with the other Bolivarian Republic, because maybe this is a good situation for Colombia, and I finish with this. Whatever Trump touches, it means that in terms of electoral votes, the opposition of the left-wing parties will be benefits from it. People in Latin America, majority of us, we do really hate the United States and can't stand to be intervened by them again and again. So Gustavo Petro now has a good chance to be re-elected next year.
Okay, Don DeBar, this is the biggest U.S. naval mobilization in Latin America since Panama in 1989. 10,000 Navy personnel, 2,200 Marines, submarines, B-52 bombers, now B-1 bombers. Theories are flying everywhere, as experts say. This force is obviously far too big for combating drug trafficking, but others believe it's not big enough for a full invasion. What do you see as the overall purpose of this operation?
Well, the purpose is, as always, to dominate the region, and in this case, to try to bring Venezuela, along with it Nicaragua and perhaps Cuba, back into the orbit of the empire. It's not so long ago that you had Ecuador, Uruguay, other countries across the region, standing up to the United States for their sovereignty and making business deals and also cultural, political, social exchanges and towards integration outside of the empire. And the U.S. slowly ticked them off. The coup in Bolivia, the coup in essence by capturing Lenny Moreno in Ecuador, on and on. So what's interesting is that Trump ran the first time and repeated again this time against these exact types of interventions that result in forever wars. If you look at the history of the United States, as a matter of fact, in the Western Hemisphere, it has been a forever war. I mean, if you want to start with when Christopher Columbus first set foot here, fine, that would be accurate also, but certainly since the Monroe Doctrine was enunciated almost 210 years ago now, what Trump is setting up here with Venezuela is going to result in, even if he's able to capture the government, the people of Venezuela are prepared for armed struggle against an occupation, and the region is, again, digging in. So Southcom had closed down. They had to open up Southcom in order to maintain their position. Now, the largest in a very long time mobilization. These things are going to be necessary over and over until the United States recognizes the integrity of the states that people have in this area, their own sovereignty and right of self-determination and gets the hell out and lets them operate their own countries.
Mr. Bicklini, since the beginning of September, there have been about around 10 incidents of U.S. strikes on boats in Venezuelan waters, 2 in the Pacific, as the U.S. expanded its target areas. And Washington, of course, maintains the claim that the boats were carrying illegal narcotics. Give us your assessment of these strikes, and why hasn't the U.S. provided any clear identification or evidence of the alleged criminal conduct of these targeted vessels, specifically now that there are allegations circulating that innocent people have been killed?
That's the old bread and butter from CIA and from United States. I can tell you that the majority of the headquarters of the Rio cartels, they are very well located and mapped by United States intelligence, or at least United States silent intelligence. If they wanted to, they could provide those addresses to President Claudia Sheinbaum from Mexico, and Mexico federales could get ripped off the leaders of the Rio cartels in Mexico, or even in Ecuador, when we all know, including the state treasury knows from United States, that the company which belongs to the Noboa family, to have the name of Noboa Trading, is accused by 4 times from Ecuadorian justice and international justice too, including US justice, for smuggling and trafficking narcotics from Ecuador. They are accusing those vessels of belonging to the National Liberation Army, which is opposing Gustavo Petro and do have some source of peace talking. And those peace talks, sometimes they do happen in La Habana, sometimes they do happen in Panama. What the difference now is that from comparing to 1989, Manuel Noriega is a former CIA agent and also a former Medellin cartel member, head commander of Medellin cartel. So he was a well-known asset from United States intelligence. And now they are trying to find fishermen and figure them as narco dealers, but they are not. Not all of those vessels do have narcotics, and they can prove even one single vessel of being attacked of to having narcotics. And we all know and insist, and I finish with this, the major dealer, narco dealer for United States, go through huge merchant vessels, plenty of banana and coffee, to some ports at Sinaloa, and then they go there to United States. It's not the small submarines or small vessels going through the Caribbean. This is not an enemy. This is not an asset. This is an excuse for provoking Venezuela and Colombia.
Okay. Don DeBar, so many questions about the rules of engagement and the legality of Washington's attacks around Venezuela, now in the Pacific as well. Colombia's president has slammed Donald Trump's so-called anti-drug airstrikes, calling for accountability. He said the United States is committing extrajudicial executions regardless of whether the boatmen are guilty of transporting cocaine or not. In addition to that, also, we saw last week the admiral overseeing the Trump administration's military campaign announced an early resignation, which even further raises questions about the legality and human cost of these operations.
Well, legality, people invoke the word from time to time and wonder where they get the nerve to, because it generally follows a period of their behavior that makes it absurd for them to utter the word. John Bolton, Trump's national security something or other last time, came in as an expert, quote unquote, on particularly on Latin America, where he had been aggressively working involved trying to recapture Nicaragua, for example, and keep some of the other states in line. Decides on his own, once he gets his new job with Trump, that Nicolas Maduro, the guy who was elected several times by the people of Venezuela to be president, he's not president. Instead, some guy, Juan Guaido, who had about 8 people vote for him in a contested election for the National Assembly, he's the president of Venezuela. And consequently, he's the guy that can sign off on the sale of oil franchises across the United States and a whole bunch of money that was taken in various banks in the U.S. and Europe. That was considered legal under American law and executed. Billions were taken that way. This same guy also brokered a deal between Iran, supposedly, and the Contras to funnel weapons over into the war in Iraq and Iran that were not permitted under the law of the United States and not funded by the Congress. They basically went into the drug smuggling business in Colombia and elsewhere in the region in order to fund an illegal war in the Middle East. These people are now the ones arguing about what's legal, and they're pointing figures about drug running when they're the biggest drug dealers in the history of the world sitting in Washington.
Bruno Bicklin to Donald Trump. He just recently said strikes on land could be next. It definitely sounds like this is all becoming more than just about combating drug trafficking. Nicolas Maduro, he said that these operations are in fact a threat and a siege, asserting they seek regime change to seize oil via land invasion. What are your thoughts on that? Because many analysts already believe that a prospect of a land invasion of Venezuela would quickly run into major problems, and any invasion would likely spark a widespread resistance from both civilians and armed groups, turning this into a long and costly quagmire.
This is the real deal now. They do have so many troops to so-called combat narco dealers, and they don't have even 1/10% of the amount of troops to invade Venezuela. So what do they want? They want to provoke Bolivarian Army and National Forces to answer that provocation and goes to a false flag operation. Then they can allow that they have been attacked and they can try to do something inside of Venezuela. I was very glad this morning that I read in Telesur, and also I think in Hispan TV too, that Nicolas Maduro said and proclaimed that they are going in a 72 hours military exercise, and do they have the commitment from Russia and China to the supply chain logistics of the national defense. So this may escalate for a continental war. I really don't think that Trump may go on betting on this scale. But what we know about the presence of United States in all over Latin America is that they do never give up. They always pretend that we are the backyard of them, and they are always trying to do those kind of politics we call big stick politics or U.S. Marine troops style politics. They will try something to get Maduro down, and I don't think they are going to be successful.
Don DeBar, Donald Trump did say land strikes could be next. If he does have his sights set on what is being called the toppling of the government of Maduro, regime change, would he seek congressional approval for that? He still said he won't need congressional approval, but he will be briefing Congress on the anti-trafficking attacks that have taken place so far.
And we're going to go to a legal argument. Under the War Powers Act, which purports to modify the constitutional requirement that only Congress can declare war, the president has a set period of time, I forget, 60, 90, 120 days, after hostilities commence, quote unquote, in order to report to the Congress, and then some things happen that further down the line, it'll come to perhaps an up and down vote in Congress, whether to issue a declaration of war or to order that the troops come home. When this happened with Libya, for example, the Obama administration in court, when they were brought to court by 10 members of Congress who sued, Kucinich, Collier, Conyers, a bunch of others, the position of the administration was that because they had taken out Libya's air defenses at the very beginning, and as they bombed Libya for 7 months every day, 11 hours a day in every city, because the Libyans couldn't shoot back, there were no hostilities. That the bombing by the United States or NATO or whatever they called group of American proxies that were blowing up Libya from March 20th to October 20th of 2011, because they weren't shooting back, there were no hostilities for the purposes of the War Powers Act. So if Trump says he's not going to get get permission from Congress to make war on Venezuela, he probably means it. And in any event, who in Congress is going to rally the Congress to vote against that war, where you would need a majority or perhaps a two-thirds majority in both houses in order to stop them? I don't see any of them. No, I haven't heard a word out of Congress for the entire time since the 2002 coup in Venezuela that the United States has been attempting to overthrow the government there and starve the people for failing to join in that action. And so I don't think what the view of anyone about what the legalities are here is going to matter for a hill of beans. This is about power. The people of Venezuela will defend themselves for the same reason that Cuba has not been invaded yet after 65 years of hell that's been imposed on them, because they know the Cuban people will stand and fight to the death of the last person and take a lot of Americans with them. The people of Venezuela have been training for this also now for 25 years. That is not going to be a walk-in and occupy fight. That will take down whoever sets foot across the border. And so they may want to throw military material, bomb, or whatever on the land in there.
Okay.
But when they set foot on the land in there, they're going to have a fight like they've never met before.
Bruno Baclini, let's focus on Venezuela's response to all of this. The president, Nicolas Maduro, urged the U.S. to avoid conflict, warning of military escalation. No to crazy war, I believe, were his exact words. Maduro stressed what we spoke about earlier, that people in the military are united at the highest level to defend the country's sovereignty and independence. The defense minister announced that the armed forces are maintaining a full deployment along the country's coast to achieve a quote-unquote optimal point of coordination and readiness to respond to this U.S. naval buildup in the Caribbean. Along the lines of what you said, the Caribbean, it looks like a powder keg right now.
I think that what's going on in Venezuela is that the relationship between the Maduro administration, the armed forces, the high ranks of his administration and government, and also many parts of the social fabric, they are much more united now than they have been in the last 2 years, I think so. First, because there is no alternative. Which is the alternative? It's going to put in power Maria Corina Machado, who committed herself to sell all of the country to American businessmen. She said so, not me, she said. The other possibility is to give up sovereignty and admit that Venezuela is a huge colony of United States capital and sovereign command. I really think that still maybe Pentagon is not thinking of a ground invasion in Venezuela, but to try to provoke and even make attempts or try to eliminate Nicolás Maduro, Vladimir Padrino, which is the defense minister, and then establish a kind of transitory government more sympathetic to United States and based on mercenaries and betrayers and traitors. This is their possibility now, if I still understand what is going on in their mind. But nowadays, today even, Venezuela do have the strength necessary to keep on power and keep the hands on the country.
Don DeBar, coup attempts, threats of military intervention, supporting self-appointed presidents. The attitude and stance hasn't changed regarding Venezuela over different U.S. administrations. What is the end game for the U.S. when it comes to Venezuela?
Well, the end game for the U.S. with respect to Venezuela, Iran, a host of others, is to take control of their oil and other natural resources and remove them as possible allies of or centers of opposition to them, geopolitically on the global stage or even at the regional level. When Venezuela joined Cuba and very few other nations in Latin America, 25, 27 years ago, in having another moment of independence from the United States, you ended up seeing a bunch of multilateral institutions spring up across the region and people standing up in a number of places. You get Lula in Brazil. You had Cristina Fernandez and her husband in Argentina. You've had, of course, Bolivia and Uruguay and next to Venezuela, next to Ecuador, and also Mel Zelaya. The entire region saw, people standing up and grabbing sovereignty and the right of self-determination and exercising it. This was catalyzed by Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba. It started in several places, and these embers caught fire and got larger, where you had, for a moment, Brazil and Argentina tossing in with this movement. This has to be suppressed if the empire is going to survive. And this problem is facing them around the world. It's in West Africa, across Eurasia, of course, and elsewhere. The problem for them is, if we're going to own and control everything, we can't allow anyone else to own or control anything. And Venezuela is one place where they don't own or control a great deal of oil and other natural resources, and a pivot point for controlling the home region of the United States.
Sure, and one last question for Mr. Bicklini, very briefly, if you may, because we're running out of time. Donald Trump, he confirmed, I think about a week ago, that he authorized the CIA to carry out covert operations in Venezuela. Nicolas Maduro denounced those remarks, saying that they reflect a pattern of unsuccessful U.S. military interventions in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Libya. Historically, we know that the U.S. has always had a meddlesome hand in Latin America. Help us better understand what it is that Washington is worried about here.
This is something stubborn from Donald Trump. We all know that CIA do have espionage stations in every embassy and consulate inside of all of our countries. So announcing that CIA will do covert operations inside of Venezuela is just like announcing that tomorrow will be a sunny day or a rainy day, because we all know this. That's what Maduro said. Trump said what we already know.
Okay, thanks a lot, gentlemen. We're going to leave it there. Academic and political analyst Bruno Bicklini joining us from Porto Alegre, Brazil, and radio host and journalist at CPR News, Don DeBar, speaking to us from New York. And a special thanks to you, our viewers, for staying with us on tonight's edition of Spotlight. It's good night for now, and see you next time.